NGO stands for, right? Non-governmental organization. Another way of saying it is civil society. Those are the little platoons of people who are out there making the world better. Local food bank, people who train seeing eye dogs. But of course, in 2024, most NGOs are actually GONGOs, government organized non-government organizations. They're sort of a trick because they are arms and fingers of government. That's why I like our next guest. He is, you could say, an NGO, but he's not a lapdog. He's a watchdog. He doesn't take a dime from the government. I wish other NGOs were independent like him. That way they could help hold our government to account. You know who I'm talking about. It's one of my favorite guys, Franco Terrazzano. He's the boss of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and I trust him because he's an NGO, not a gongo, not a government-organized NGO, and he joins us now via Skype. Franco, good to see you again.
Hey, Ezra, great to be on with you today. And just want to reiterate, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has never taken a cent from the government, never have, never will.
That's why I trust you, because I know, like us, you are loyal to thousands of individual people who chip in. What's the membership, $75, something like that?
Oh, no, you can, if you have the means to send us a voluntary donation, you can give any amount that you'd like.
Right on. Well, I just wanted to toot your horn because you know what? I could count on one hand's fingers the number of NGOs in this country that don't take dough from the government. And boy, we need voices like yours. Because first of all, I'm not going to learn about the things I need to know. And if there's a problem, they'll be spinning for the government instead of shining a light of scrutiny. I want to read from your latest press release, and then maybe you can take us through it. Trudeau government spends millions producing podcasts. Now, podcast, I never really understood the word. I think it comes from iPod or something, but you could say this is a podcast. I guess it is. I think of it as a TV show because I used to be on, quote, real TV. But a podcast is just people giving their opinions, covering the news. It's like a mini internet age TV or radio show, right? That's what it means. So why is the government getting into the podcast business?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's dozens of federal departments and agencies that are spending millions of dollars, tax dollars, in recent years on podcasts. And not only just on podcasts, that podcast that almost nobody is listening to. You know, I can't believe I need to say this out loud with my face, but taxpayers expect the government to, I don't know, fix the potholes, process passports, not produce podcasts that only a bunch of bureaucrats and their families are listening to. Like, this is such a complete waste of money, Ezra, and we can get into the details about the absurdity of some of these podcasts. But you know what this really is? This really is a make work project for a bunch of government bureaucrats in Ottawa that we don't need. Make no mistake about it. It's a taxpayer-funded make work project for a bunch of bureaucrats we don't need.
You know, some of my favorite podcasts, the people are smoking cigarettes, they're having a drink. Joe Rogan famously sometimes lights up a marijuana joint. Like, they're just a place for guys and gals to chat and gossip. And the idea that we're paying people in government to lounge around and have like locker talk is crazy. But I want to read from your press release today on this subject. I mean, Statistics Canada, even they are losing their nonpartisan nature. I rely on them. We have to, because they sometimes are the only source for certain stats. But I didn't know that they had a government-funded bureaucrat staff podcast. Let me just read two lines from your press release. Take A. Sayers podcast from Statistics Canada. I don't even know what that title means, which has 21 episodes. Topics have ranged from gender identity to climate change and misinformation to systemic racism. By the way, none of that's got anything to do with their mission, which is collecting statistics on Canada. But let me just read the closing part, and then I want you to tee off on this. The podcast has racked up 229 estimated subscribers, according to records. So they've been around for 3 years. They've had 21 episodes and a grand total of 229 people have watched them. Now, in a way, this is good because that's just pure propaganda being pumped out by the government. So it's good, but it's also such a laugh, the millions of dollars spent by government on podcasts, and literally no one other than maybe their friends and family are listening.
Well, Ezra, I mean, you really set the ball in the tee for me to swing away, right? But look, like also too, the cost for this Stats Canada podcast that, I mean, you mentioned some of the topics. Those topics clearly have nothing to do with gathering statistics. But look, like this is costing taxpayers for this podcast alone, just under $1 million. $970,000. Ezra, I don't even know how you spend $970,000 on a podcast, but leave it to the government. And you mentioned for almost $1 million, they've got 229 subscribers. So that's a taxpayer cost of like more than $4,000 for each subscriber. And you mentioned some of the topics that they're talking about, gender identity, climate change, arts and crafts, misinformation, systemic racism. There was one podcast episode where they have a drag king on the show. They start with drag story time. I don't know what that has to do with collecting data. Another podcast episode was about misinformation, where they talk about the problem with giving both sides of the issue consideration. How about this one? They have a podcast episode about the necessity of the arts and crafts community in Canada.
That's what people do. That's what people should do for fun. When I was a child in kindergarten, grade 1, we did arts and crafts. That was called playtime. You know, and I'm not diminishing it when adults like to have hobbies. I think adults should have hobbies. It's better than making politics your hobby. But the idea that the government, I can't get over that $970,000. Franco, I don't know if you've been in our studio in person. We sort of spruced it up. We got a nice desk and some lighting. We have a different area there and over here. The grand total cost for our entire studio, including all the cameras, all the computers, I think it was $40,000. Now, and I think it looks fine. How do you even spend $970,000? What is it? I don't get it. At Sun News Network, we had a huge studio, 3 robot cameras, a 5-person control room. And I remember that cost about $1 million for a huge real TV studio. I don't get how Statistics Canada can spend $970,000 on a podcast that 229 people have subscribed to. I don't get it. Like, who is this? Like the ArriveCan app, where it's actually a few $1,000 to make and everyone else just pockets the rest? How do you spend $970,000 on a podcast, Franco? I don't know how.
No, honestly, Ezra, I don't know either, right? But there's a couple other points I just want to bring up. Number one is, like I mentioned, some of the topics that they're talking about on the podcast. Well, you essentially have taxpayers funding progressive political talking points. Now, Ezra, look, if these bureaucrats want to, make their own podcasts using their own dime and their own time on climate change or misinformation, fill your boots. Right? Like if you want to go on your Saturdays and Sundays on your own dime, not on the taxpayer dime, and talk about this and build up your own podcast, all the power to you. Right? The problem is that taxpayers are funding this, and not even just that we're funding these political talking points, but that taxpayers are funding government podcasts that no one is barely even listening to in the first place.